I think in the second half of the Championship season, when Enzo Maresca did get Leicester promoted and in addition did win the league, so we can't exactly call the second half of the season bad, but they had a wobble from kind of February that they were able to recover in the April period. And in that string of results, the away form in particular came under a lot of scrutiny. There was a 1-0 loss to Bristol City. They lost 1-0 to Millwall. They lost 1-0 to Plymouth Argyle. And in all three of those games, the criticism was, again, around, as you alluded to, a little bit of stubbornness. And on the road, they struggled to break down teams with low blocks. The selection came under scrutiny. The feeling was that they were making needless errors at the back and putting themselves under pressure in tight games. And perhaps it was just better to abandon that and go long and more direct. But that's not what Enzo Maresca does. He's told the sort of quite famous story now of a home game against Birmingham City where Mads Hedmonton, the goalkeeper, played it short. He got blocked by Jay Stansfield. The ball went in the back of the net and Maresca turned around to him at half-time and said, if you play it long, I'm going to substitute. You stick to your principles. So the principles came under a bit of scrutiny at Leicester for being too rigid. But I think the other thing was on the road, there was just a lack of appetite, even though on paper Leicester were dominant, much like Chelsea compared to their opposition, to kill off games. And that really frustrated the Leicester supporters who felt like 1-0 was never going to be enough. And actually, we were lucky in the run in the back end of the season to score one at all. But if there were games where Leicester got ahead, home or away, in the second half of that season, you never felt like they had that killer instinct to get a second. And more often than not, even though they ended up getting promoted, Leicester found that that lack of a second goal cost them points. And that really ended up, by the end of the tenure and despite the promotion, frustrating some of the Foxes fan base.
Ben, you've kind of described Chelsea
a
little bit right there, as you well know. I want to go back to something that I've noticed here, is in the second half recently where it feels as though the control... He talks about the control of a game. We didn't have control of the game. It's a phrase that he's used often. Even when we were winning games, he said about the control. Was that something that you felt in the second half, whether it be in the beginning of the season or halfway through or the end, that second half that the game changed? And did he do enough to turn the game back into his favour?
Yeah, Leicester didn't have as much depth, so he certainly didn't use substitutions as much, and there was a heavy reliance on Vardy and his goals and Mavididi out wide. And the thing that I noticed at Leicester was less about substitutes, because you sort of accepted that that squad was good enough and so was the starting 11, and the fixture calendar wasn't as congested in the second half of the season. But it was very much a case of wanting the wingers to stay very wide and high up the field and still have that offensive output. And away from home, what happened was the wingers were not tracking back at Leicester and defending enough, and it was allowing opportunities and space in the centre of the park for home sides to dominate the game. The possession stats on the road dropped, and it meant that Leicester didn't actually have as much of the ball, and when they did, they were getting caught out at the back. So the big kind of criticism with Maresca was a little bit of inconsistency and a little bit of perhaps over loyalty to certain players. And by inconsistency, I mean they did it one way at home, one way away, even though they were good enough to play the same way home and away. And by loyalty, I mean Vardy was tiring at the end of the season and yet was still naturally very important. Mavididi was having to pick up a lot of slack centrally and wasn't getting back defensively as much. And then the deeper midfielders, which obviously at Chelsea could be an Enzo Fernandez, a Moises Caicedo, a Romeo Lavia if they're fit. At Leicester, it was a Wilfred Ndidi and a Harry Winks. There became needless pressure on them to constantly get box to box to keep the balance of the side. And if they lost the ball sloppily in central midfield with an errant pass or just because they got out of position in an attacking phase, constantly Leicester would get caught on the counter-attack. And I think the fan base just felt like better game management would have resolved all of that. The idea that Leicester fans were glad to see the back of him, I think, has been over-exaggerated. And right now, I think Leicester fans, in hindsight, would love him to still be there, even over a Ruud van Nistelrooy and certainly a Steve Cooper. And remember a well-reported incident when the players went on a scheduled Christmas party to Copenhagen and they were holding up a sign saying, "Enzo, I miss you." So actually, behind the scenes, very liked by Top, the chairman, and the players, the fans were just a little bit frustrated because they didn't like, in the early stages, the slower kind of build-up. Then they got used to it, and then they felt that it was all a little bit too rigid, and it was like inevitable that we were going nowhere with the ball when we got nervous in the back half of the season and would ultimately be punished. But the bigger picture is that he got Leicester promoted and under difficult financial situation, and he actually won the championship. So we mustn't forget the fact that his record at Leicester was phenomenal, despite some of these criticisms that we're making in the second half of the season.
Ben, it's been great to have you on the show. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for your expertise, and we'll see you soon.
Look forward to it.
Oh, Ben, what a guy. We love that man. Matisse, just off the back of that, do you think Chelsea lack a plan B?
I said at the start of the season, I think the squad was built to play a certain type of football and a certain style, which I think was the perfect game. Everybody ball to feet a little bit. There are some runs in behind from Neto, but basically the ball's on the ground and Chelsea have got to cut through teams with a lot of precision and a lot of flair and a lot of, trickery. I don't think there was really a plan B in terms of the makeup of the squad, and I think, Maresca's only as good as the tools he's got to work with in terms of set pieces, in terms of crossing the ball and finding an aerial presence. I think Jackson obviously is as good as he's been. He doesn't have great box movement. I think that's something he needs to improve. He's not an aerial threat. He's not he's not able to go up against those centre backs. So that is something that limits Maresca in regards to what he can do, and he has to still stick to maybe certain principles and certain styles. So I do sympathise with him on that side, because if we were to give him more physical profiles or to give him alternatives in that regard, with centre-backs that could score from corners, maybe we would see different ways of Chelsea getting goals, and that would be the plan B.
I do think he does. We've seen plan Bs, though, this season. Think about the Brighton game at home. That wasn't necessarily slow, plodding build-up. There was just balls over the top because Brighton were playing a ridiculously high line.
Yeah.
And you think about the Newcastle game, and I know that took the genius of Cole Palmer to play the ball over the top to Pedro Neto, but we have gone long on occasion and it has worked. Think about the Wolves game away from home. That wasn't the slow, plodding, build-up play. So we have shown that there's different ways to skin the cat, and we've done that this season. Whether that's more on the players, taking it on them to really affect the game and change the philosophy mid-game. But I feel like this Chelsea team has shown that they can win in different ways, in different manners. It's a case that in recent weeks we haven't seen that. But I don't think he lacks a plan B. I think that he just lacks the tools that he requires to play the football that he wants to play week in and week out. I do think there's a different plan for different opposition. I don't think that he's a manager that's stuck in his ideology.
Let's talk about our defence. We've had some issues of late. We've seen Wesley Fofana out. We're not sure how long it's going to be. Maresca has come out and said it's going to be for the rest of the season. Fofana himself then contradicted that with saying it'll be 4 to 6 weeks. What do you make of that contradiction? Firstly, Fofana being out, what do you make of that? What do you make of a potential contradiction? Is it miscommunication?
It's difficult to know, isn't it? Because, Fofana puts out one thing, and this is what we can sometimes get in social media. The manager says one thing, he's had the advice from the medical team, and then all of a sudden something comes out that's conflicting with that. I don't know is a straight answer to that. I don't have inside knowledge of Fofana's injury. The good news is it's not his knee, which I think everyone feared when we heard out potential rest of the season. Everyone's thinking, is it his knee? It's not. It's a soft tissue injury. In terms of us as a defensive unit, well, it is a unit. I know the back four get all the praise of the keeper, but the reality is Pedro Neto's got to do his job. Whether it be Felix on that other side, Sancho on that side, whether it be who's ever playing on that right-hand side, it may well be Neto. It could be anyone there. But as a unit, then you've got to think about Caicedo in the middle of the park, Lavia. There have been moments this season where we've looked good, but in a 90-minute game, we always give up a chance. Yeah. And whether that be a pass from Sanchez into Palmer's feet, he gets robbed, 2 passes later, all of a sudden we conceded. So as a unit, there's work to be done. Acheampong, I'm really pleased to see that he got his chance, by the way. I thought he was excellent against Crystal Palace. But as far as Wesley Fofana's concerned, I was just fingers crossed for the boy that he's out, not weeks as opposed to months.